So without further ado, I'm going to let John take the stage, and I think you're in for a real treat.
Thanks, man. Hi, guys. I've spent the past 15 years, Ryan talked about it, dealing with CEOs and executives. And in that time period, I probably have spent face-to-face, and the reason I'm telling you this is not because of the amount of time, but because of the principles that I've learned from doing this. I'm a bit of a student myself, so I appreciate the learning that I get every day from everybody that either touches me or I touch them. So in the past 15 years, I've spent more than 26,000 hours knee-to-knee with CEOs, talking to people. Add that up in your head, figure out how many times that is. That's a lot. I've spent more than 5,000 hours talking with executives and facilitating peer groups in safe environments where they talk about all the things that you don't talk about with everybody else. And I've learned these principles. Today we're going to talk about the changes in leadership and looking at those through the lens of a little bit of neuroscience. And then the next meeting we're going to talk about, and I'm so glad you mentioned about your executive programs, because we're going to talk about becoming a more purposeful leader. And I'm glad you used that word when you were talking about it up here with the programs that you have. And we'll kind of give you some insight into that. But I want to take you back when I was in college and graduating. The year's 1973, so you can add up how old I am. Do that in your head right now. I'm working in State College. I got a degree in marketing from Penn State. So I was in the radio business. My dad owned the radio stations up there, and this was back when radio stations were, you could own an AM and an FM radio station, not like today. Like we sold to Clear Channel Communications, and they own 1,300 radio stations plus tons of other stuff. So I'm working at the radio station. I'm selling, if you've ever been to State College, on Quick Rock, which is an album rock station, kind of now would be a classic rock station. And I'm in a sales meeting, and the leader, because we're going to talk about leaderships today, was a guy that I thought was old. I'm 21, he's 45 maybe, and we're in this meeting. In the meeting, he comes into the sales meeting. There are tables that we're sitting at our desks. There are about 5 or 6 salespeople. There were no women selling at that point in time. Now in the radio business, I'm going to say 70% of the salespeople are women, maybe more. No women. And this guy comes into the room and he goes, "We're oversold on the FM station." Now that's a classic rock or an underground album rock station at the time. What that means is we oversold the number of commercials that we could run. So we're just going to take them and run them on the AM radio station, which is playing at that time Billy Don't Be a Hero. That kind of stuff. It's a top 40 radio station. And I said at that moment, I think I'd like to ask my clients about this. It's a different audience. Let me see what we can do. And what he did was he stepped out beside me, stepped on a chair that was beside me, stepped up on the desk that I'm sitting at, and kicked everything in my face on the desk. And he said, "What are you going to do, run and tell your daddy?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm not going to tell him. You tell him I quit." So I got up and walked out of the door. Now I want to tell you, this is Leadership 1.0, okay? That's an extreme version. People liked what he did. I never told my dad, by the way, until my dad passed away a couple years ago, and we were talking in his last years, and I told him what this guy had done. He went, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." And people liked this man because he could make a lot of money. But in Leadership 1.0, people didn't react the same way we do today, if you think about it. This was through the 50s and 60s and into the 70s and even into the 80s and 90s. And what happened was we look back on that time period and we say, gee, employees stayed with a company a long time, right? They must have really liked that company. They really did. And what I found after working with CEOs all this period of time was that people stayed with the company because there were more people than there were jobs. In other words, there weren't enough jobs, so if I quit this job, I couldn't go to the next job. I had to stick there. As a matter of fact, in this command and control environment, it was based on rewards and consequences. It was the fear of being fired. People got afraid of being fired because there just wasn't another position. It was more important to have a job than to really enjoy the work. People needed a job. If they got fired, they couldn't find a job. They couldn't go out and do it. There's a researcher whose name is Don Ream. He's written a book called Thrive by Design, and he calls this the age of compliance. In other words, maybe some of you are old enough. I see lots of faces that are not old enough in the room to think about this, but I'm going to tell you that it was a completely different place. I used a real extreme example to give you that, but we have evidence even today in this community with people that I work with where it's a command and control environment. I'm going to tell you, most people don't like that a whole lot. Most people are not digging the command and control environment. Most organizations that are stuck there are not going to be able to thrive in the next generation of what leadership is about. Because leadership is not about command and control today. I'm going to take you to where it's going so that we can understand that a little bit. So here we are now, kind of for the next 10 years or so, I think, 5 to 10 years in Leadership 2.0. I want to tell you a story about a company I work with. They let me use their name, so I'm going to tell you who it is. One of the CEOs that I work with is a gentleman named Anson Flake. Anson ran a company for a long time called HydroWorks. And what they did was they made treadmills that were in pools. It was therapeutic water therapy to help people get better. And what Anson did over a period of time as a CEO is he developed a couple of things. One is he said, we need a real vision for the organization. For quite some time, when I first met him, he said, we want to make X amount of money, pick a number, 25 million bucks, 30 million bucks, 50 million bucks, whatever it was. That did not resonate with people very well. And then what he did was he said, what is the business that we're in doing? Well, we're in the business of helping people improve their lives through water therapy. So what happens is that every professional athlete that you know has used a HydroWorks pool to become healthy again. They rehab in the pool. It takes a lot of pressure. People who have had hip and knee replacements, once they get the wound area repaired, they go in and do it. People who are overweight that can't do it, people have diabetes, they all use water therapy. And so what Anson talked about with his team was, we're going to, if we make a difference in the lives of 50,000 patients a month, we're going to make a difference and our company will be hugely successful. And that became the rallying cry for HydroWorks. 50,000 patients was the number. They used patient videos to talk about the impact they were making on that. And it was incredible. The other thing that happened with that was he said, look, I'd like to develop a culture where people actually want to come to work, where it's fun to come to work. You can all feel those cultures, right? When you walk into some place, you walk into a place and you say, that seems like a really cool place. Then you walk into other place and you say, not so good, doesn't feel right. People feel the mojo is not exactly right. So Anson developed a culture that was incredibly different. So he had a big vision. He had a culture that he began to work with. And now what we're seeing, because we're in it today, for those of you in the job market soon, or for those of you who are working today or hiring people, the number one thing that all the organizations that I work with have as a difficult problem is finding people to work for you. Not only that, but then keeping them to work for you. I've had people poached right and left from companies that I'm working with. And so having a differentiator, whether it's a vision that resonates with people or a culture that is meaningful to people, is significant. I think it's such an interesting thing. Sometimes South Central Pennsylvania feels like four old guys at a barber shop, talking about stuff, all right? And it's not really that way, because I have lots of really very good CEOs that I work with. But people blame a lot of things on millennials. I'm not sure that's the case at all. As a matter of fact, I don't think that's the case at all. The real reason people leave organizations is they have a lousy culture and they have caustic, terrible leaders in their organization. And if you're not looking at that moving forward, you're missing something. I'm going to tell you, so you're going to get interspersed throughout this my stories of people that I've worked with, and where I can't tell you the names I will, this one I won't. But company that I work with has about 400 people that work on the floor of a factory. And for all the years that I work with them, the average turnover per year, now think about this, they have 400 people. Anybody have a guess at what the turnover rate is at that company? 40%. 40% of their employees turn over every year. That means if you have 200 people, a bunch turn over. Okay, you're running an employment agency. You're running an employment agency and it's not really good. So what they thought, they were paying people minimum wage. And they thought, look, if we get people up to a much higher wage level, that will be the reason that people will stick around. So they went from whatever it was, $8.50, $9, $10 an hour, and they moved their starting pay, which costs, I'll tell you how much it cost them in a second, but they moved their starting pay up to $18 an hour. The next year, they looked at their turnover. You know what their turnover was? 40%. They spent $4 million on paying people more, and the turnover didn't move once. Okay? Did not move at all. So I think that what they did was we sat down and we said, why don't we go talk to the people that are actually working on the floor and see what the issue was? And we found that, number one, the guy who was the plant manager was this guy who's like this tall, veins popping out on his neck, screamed at people all the time, and got a lot done, increased efficiency, but people hated their jobs and then quit after a while. They just left. You know, people don't have to do those jobs. They can go find another job tomorrow. They're in a factory setting right now. You can go get a job tomorrow if you want to. In any setting, I think you can go find a job. So what we did was two things. One is, and they just did this recently, they have replaced the plant manager with somebody who is a much more purposeful leader, who is actually looking to develop those and cares about those human beings that work there. And they also went down and stepped into the supervisory level people and said, if you're not going to get better, we're going to replace you too. And they started a training program for them to actually tell them how to be leaders, because so often we have people that get advanced into position. I mean, if you think about this, the first time people become leaders in an organization is about at the age of 26. You know when they first get their training? When they're 42. 42. So all that rest of the time is just on-the-job training. You know, we're going to teach you how to do it. That doesn't make you good. That just makes you kind of knowledgeable sometimes, but it really is helpful to train people, and they've seen a dramatic turn in the turnover rate in their organization. So, you know, turnover is a reflection of any number of things, but I usually think it's bad culture, bad leaders, as you think about it. Some people kind of look for the good old days, and they say, hey, we're going to like the good old days. We like that command and control environment. I like to tell people what to do, and they should do it. I'm going to tell you that people want to look forward today to come to work, and they want a workplace that's positive. They don't want to deal with an environment where it's not good. Collaborative and relational mindsets are also important, as are performance metrics. Sometimes people say, I want a great culture, right? Culture is preeminent in my organization. And I have a large organization here in town that said, our culture is really important. It is the most important thing to us here. And so I went and interviewed all of their leadership team. I interviewed the second and the third layer down from the top. And you know what I found was that what people were hearing was the culture is pretty good, but the only thing that people ever talked to them about were financial metrics, and they believed that was the only thing that mattered to this company. It stunned the CEO of the company. It stunned him. He thought he was building this great culture, and yet he focused only on those financial metrics. And I just talked to one of the CEOs that I work with this week. He's got about 350 people working for him, and he's had a fairly high turnover rate. And what he said is he's going to stop dealing with financial metrics. He's going to look at the metrics associated with delivering a great experience to those people as in the environment, and I think you're going to find it'll be quite a bit different there. If you've probably heard the Gallup numbers associated this, but Gallup has done research for the past 60 years. This needle has not moved. 60 years. 70% of all employees are disengaged. 70%. Engagement means people are willing to go above and beyond the call of duty. They're emotionally attached to their work. This means that only 30% of the people, now your work environment may be different, but most of the places that I go, it's like that. And I call them this. The rest of the people are what I call 501s. 501 comes, they punch out, they're gone. Even if there's something left to do, right? You've seen those people, you're sitting there, you're doing something, 501, done, gone. And I just think that we have to consider that it hasn't changed in a long time. That's why the neuroscience associated with this is so critically important, because we have to look at what ignites people's brains to have them look at a better work environment and really give them what they're looking for here. So, I'm going to continue on. This is kind of where we're going, okay? Leadership 3.0. I call it the age of choice. If you think about it, millennials are going to represent, even today, they represent about 50% of the workforce. They're going to become the largest share of the American workforce coming up here very shortly. And by 2024, most of our leaders are going to be millennials. We can't dislike their attitudes. I mean, if you do that, I can't even believe you want to run a company today. This is just different. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and back then had a lot of hair. People would say, look at long hair, hippies, whatever it might happen to be. It's just a different time, different kind of space. But I think that we have to get used to the fact that these people are going to be running our companies, and they're going to bring new perspective, new ideas, great ideas, and lots of energy to what we want to do. As a matter of fact, just FYI for you, there's a book that's written by the Center for Creative Leadership down in the Carolinas, and it talks about the myths about millennials. And we have this myth that millennials don't want to work, and they work more hours than anybody else does. They just don't want to sit at their desk all the damn time, So I think we have to get used to that in terms of what's going on. Now, not only do people in Leadership 3.0 want to do a good job, but they want to do a job that will make a difference. They want to create an impact. They want to have a meaningful space where they come in and do stuff. So in this age of choice, people are going to look for a job that makes a difference. We have to be able to translate that for people, and I'll give you a sample of that in a minute. This is kind of the one thing that I hear from people, the participation trophy type thing, that everybody gets a trophy. And all we have, and it's everybody, it's not millennials, we have neglected validation. We have neglected recognition of people. It's kind of come to work, do a good job, thank you, go home. And we need to validate and recognize people. I had been meeting with some of the folks from HYP a couple years ago. I've done some work with them, Harrisburg Young Professionals, for those of you who don't know that. And here's a quote. They said to me, you live to work, I work so I can live. And that would tick off some people, but it just speaks about the balance that people are looking for. So there's a different perspective. My sons, who are in their 30s, all have a different perspective about how they balance their lives compared to what I did. And that's a good thing, I think. It's not a bad thing. Growth of social networks is also very key to people, like this network here. This is a big deal. People get together, they get to stay connected. People want to feel connected to other people. They're looking for ecosystems, I call them ecosystems, where they can collaborate. And they won't tolerate toxic managers. I mean, I'm sure if I said, can you think of somebody that you were around or that you worked with that was not great? The guy that I worked with, that I mentioned at the very beginning, was successful, but he left a string of really debris behind him through his entire career. He didn't have much of a moral compass. I mean, somebody who would do that to a kid in an environment, a young person, is not the person you want to go to work for. And if you had a choice, today we have a choice. I don't think that he could live and work in the environment that we have today. I wanted to also make mention, maybe you all have heard of, if you haven't, I'm going to walk through it here with you, but what people are motivated by today is a couple of things that's different than it used to be. And I thought I'd run through these. You know, Daniel Pink has written a book called Drive. There's a video if you want to go see it. It's on LinkedIn or on YouTube. And there are 3 things that he says motivate people in today's world when we look at Leadership 3.0. The first one is mastery. We all want to get better at what we do, right? You want to get better every day at what you do. Most people are looking to achieve more, get better, and so they'd like to learn and grow in the environment. As a matter of fact, there have been studies that have been done that show that in particular millennials will give up pay to get into an environment where they can learn and grow. If you're not thinking about that in your environment, if you're not showing people a pathway to success, you're going to miss the boat. The other thing that people want is self-directedness. In other words, I call them benevolent dictators. You know, people that I work with a lot have a tendency to go up to you and say, I really like what you're doing. They put their arm around you and then they go, but I'd like you to do it this way. They micromanage you to the point of being distracting, and people cannot take that today. People will blow out if they do. The third thing that people are looking for, and if we disconnect from this entirely, it's really a bad thing, is purpose. And I'm going to talk more about purpose next time, do a presentation and defining what that purpose is, but I think it's a pretty key component of where we need to go and what's going to be happening. So if we now kind of step into that space of the neuroscience and we look at this, you know, they've connected people to magnetic imaging machines. They've looked at how your brain fires off. And, you know, we are hardwired. Our DNA has hardwired us to have a hunger for social connections. Even as introverts, and just so that you know, and maybe you're not aware of this, at least 50% or more of the CEOs that I work with are introverts. They are not extroverted people. They are introverted people. The difference between them and an extrovert is it just takes a little more energy to stand up like I'm doing right now and talk to people, and they need to recharge their batteries differently. But there are many, many, many introverts, and that does not mean you can't be a great leader. So don't ever let that stand in your way of leadership if you feel like you're an introvert. And I don't think we also have to say, I have to tell you a quick story. So I work with a very large company, about $1 billion company, engineers at the leadership level, and the guy who's at the head of the company is a big extrovert dominator, okay? So usually when you have an extrovert dominator, what do they hire? Other extrovert dominators to be in the room with them. So I go to a meeting and there are like 25 people on the leadership team, and it feels a little bit like a fist fight. You know, there are people that are kind of, and then everybody is not the extrovert dominator in the room. There are some people who are, you know, if you've looked at various different metrics, you can use a DISC or something like that, but they're the people who are the stable people, and they're sitting back going, I have no idea what's going on here. This kind of scares me, so I'm not going to say anything in this. So when you think about an organization, we need all types of people in the room, all genders of people in the room. If we're going to do really well, we have to do all that kind of stuff. So the magnetic imaging suggests that being in close social proximity and being connected is the most efficient for your brain. In other words, your brain doesn't have to work as much when you're in social proximity with people. It really works better in that environment, and it's kind of a cool thing. We're also, if we think about this, we like to be connected. We're kind of like herd animals. We feel better when we're in a group, and we're looking for these safe, secure connections with others. People look to avoid long social and emotional isolation. So if you think about it, people do not want to be isolated. They do not want to be set apart from people. We have these office environments where we lock people in someplace else and they get isolated. Some people might be able to work in that. I'm going to say not too many. The other thing that happens is that others together help ensure survival and scan for mutual threats. And what happens is when those threats occur, then trust evaporates and the very foundation for an organization goes away. So I work with a firm that's relatively close by here in Mechanicsburg, and over the past 3 years they've grown very quickly. But what's happened recently is that because of some of the technology associated with the business that they're in, they've had a little bit of a setback. And in the growth, philosophically, what they did was they just said, like many organizations do that are growing very quickly, we'll just throw more people at this and hopefully we'll be able to get all the work done that we have. Unfortunately, what happened is they overcooked it and had too many people. So for the past year, they've had 3 different scale backs in the number of people. And when I talked to them, I said, look, why don't you guys take all the pain at one time? Just fire everybody you have to. If you have to fire people, I'm not going to encourage you to do that, but do it one time. And they've made it now 3 times. And what has happened now is I'm talking to people 2 layers down in the organization, and they go, are we next? What's going to happen here? They come to work every day, and they're not feeling very safe, and the trust has evaporated. And I think they could have managed it better and let a number more people go, and they just were unwilling to do that at the time. And I think that you have to think about this. So this kind of social nutrients in an ecosystem, Gallup shows, if you do look at their studies, that if you don't have at least one friend at work to develop a safe attachment to the job. So if you don't have a friend, it's hard to develop an attachment to the job. It's why having mentors or assigning people when you onboard people. When I started in the radio business, now in the big job that I got, the first big job after State College, I went to Pittsburgh and worked at a radio station in Pittsburgh. So here's what they did for me when I went in. They gave me a desk and they handed me the phone book and they said, that's your account list, goodbye. That was it. And so I had to either, it was like a shark. You had to sell and keep swimming or you were dead. And so I had to go into that environment, which today I would never put anybody into. Who would do that? It's a terrible environment if you think about it. I also think we have to be in this environment to develop these social nutrients, to be connected to people. We have to be willing to ask a few questions. So I'm going to give you 4 or 5 questions here. I'm going to tell you a quick story. I have this grouchy CEO that I work with up in Lewisburg. And this guy is, he's in his mid-60s and he doesn't like to be connected to people. He thinks of himself as a bit of a loner. And so we walk through these questions that I'm going to give you in a second. And he said, I think that's just not for me. I'm not going to do it. So he's in the doctor's office up in Lewisburg, and we talk about how you connect with people and where you gain these connections. He's in the doctor's office getting ready for some sort of physical or something like that, and he's waiting in the office, and he said, okay, John may be right, I'll try this here. So he starts talking to this woman and asks her where she's from originally. He finds out that the woman who's the receptionist in the doctor's office grew up 2 doors down from his wife, knew his wife's family, was very connected with his wife growing up, and still would love to get a chance to see his wife again. They had a wonderful conversation. He said, I can't believe it. We have to be curious, and here are just easy questions for you to ask. These are very simple, but I'm going to give you something that you can do. especially for the introverts in the room that don't like sticking your hand out and talking to people, right? Because it's tough to do. So if you have these planned, you can do it, and these are so simple. The first question is, where are you from originally, right? Like, where are you from? Chad, you did that just talking here this morning. I heard you say that, which was really nice. So you can say, where are you from? And then you say, what brought you here? You know, why are you here? Tell me a little bit more about that. You can ask them also, do you have siblings? Where are you in the birth order? People love talking about themselves, so these are easy questions for somebody else to kind of answer. And then the last one is, what did you want to be growing up? You know, what are you doing now, and what did you want to be growing up? People need to know each other, and we need to know each other intimately in a conversation. Now, I'm going to guarantee you, try this. You can send me a note today later if you want to, if it works or doesn't. Try this among your colleagues at work. Ask these questions. I've gone around a table like this and asked everybody at the table with a group of people who've worked together 10 years or more, and I found at least one thing out in a 5-second conversation with each person that they never ask each other. Like, I asked the question of Ryan, do you have siblings? And he goes, oh yeah, I have a twin brother. And people go, you have a twin brother? I never knew that, you know, and we work together every day, you know, that type of thing. So it is that kind of thing that makes a difference. You want to draw the connections between what your brain is looking for every day. Our brain is looking for these human connections and the experience in your organization. If we don't set up ways to make that happen, it doesn't work, but if you do, it translates to the bottom line. If you think about the disengagement that I talked about a little bit earlier, it's the overt scarcity of trusted connections, unclear directions, poor direction, and a lousy boss. So think about those kind of things. The other thing that people want is predictability. No surprises. People do not want to come to work to chaos every day, people being fired, things like this. I mean, this makes sense to you. I don't know why it doesn't make sense to leaders. But some leaders think that if we have more things going on, it'll just be fun. You know, it's not fun for everybody. And I think that we have to kind of think of that. If we think here also, people crave to be part of something important. And I promise you a quick story about this. Hard to connect the dots on some kind of products. You know, I know all of you are thinking about, well, how do you connect it with what I do or whatever? Here's a quick story. A guy owned a valve company. And he's standing up in front of his team just like this, and they're showing up here instead of this. They're showing pictures of valves which are very unsexy, okay? And all of the people are out in the audience. The lights go down, the CEO stands up and he says, this morning at 9 o'clock, or at 6:30 this morning, a janitor walked down the steps in Vermont and turned 20 of our valves and made a school warm and safe for kids to go to school this morning. At 9:30 this morning in Minneapolis, they turned 120 of our valves in an operating room, and we're going to save 3 lives today. And you think we just sell valves. I think if you can connect the dots with a greater purpose, it makes a huge difference for people when they're going there. Clarity and safety. Just 2 quick things for you to think about. One is, if you think of the Me Too movement right now, we should never, ever commit to an environment or have an environment that is unsafe for anybody. The Me Too movement is just a good example of an environment that was an undercurrent of doing things bad. I mean, I think back in the 70s when I was at work, it was not the way it is today, and we should never do that. So I want you to think about that kind of safety. The other thing I want you to think about, and maybe you've heard about Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo's a large national bank. They've been under scrutiny for well over a year. They've had a culture that's been of high performance and setting very high goals for people. The problem with Wells Fargo is the goals were so high that people cheated to make the goals, to earn their commissions and make it happen. So Wells Fargo had 80,000 new accounts that were opened by their employees for people that didn't know they had accounts open at Wells Fargo. Don't think about doing that, guys, at Link Bank, you know? What also happened, then the CEO comes up and he's talking to the people and, you know, to the press, and he goes, well, you know, it was just a few bad apples here at Wells Fargo, And so what we're going to do is we're going to take care of that. You know how many people they fired? Almost 6,000 people were the bad apples. It was huge. And then the CEO threw all those people under the bus. He's now out because, you know, people, how can you believe a guy like that? Deservedly so. And we continue on. So people want clarity. They want safety. They don't want to feel like it's an environment that's not working in a way that would be good. I mentioned this before, but validation and recognition, people want validation and recognition. I've had people tell me I don't need that much. We all need some. You know, the last time, so just a quick story. One is that I go into organizations and I ask people, how do you know when you're doing a good job? Like I'd ask all of you, I go in your company and say, how do you know when you're doing a good job? You know the primary answer that I get? The absence of being yelled at. So nobody says anything. I'm doing a good job. Nobody's telling me I'm not. Think about that. That's really good. You know, that'll make a big difference. And I think this validation thing is good. And the constructive feedback that people need to be successful. If you're running a great organization, people crave the feedback. I know most of the CEOs that I work with are afraid to give constructive feedback because they think if I give you some feedback that's not positive, you're going to quit. I've never found that to be the case. As a matter of fact, it's counterintuitive. If you don't do it, your best employees will quit, period. So I'm going to give you a couple other highlights of what Gallup has looked at. Gallup did a survey about 2 years ago. These are words that employees used when they looked at what they wanted from their organization, and it's what I find in purposeful organizations also. So I kind of wanted to use their validation of this. The first thing is trust. People want to come to work with leaders that they can trust, that they believe have their back, that are not going to sell them down the road, that are going to treat them like adults. They want to be treated like good human beings, and bosses need to understand that. The trust is a key component, and lying to people is never good, or treating them with disrespect is never good. So this trust is a key component of what we're looking at. Additionally, people want stability. They want a steady hand on the tiller. Surprises every day, not so good. And you know, when you think of what happens when this goes on, I can tell you, so I went down to, I have a company that has about 3,000 employees, and the COO of the company was a longtime employee. They had hired a new CEO to be a change agent in the organization, and what he began to do was to do things that should have been done a few years before, and the organization was moving a little faster and a little faster, and the COO felt that it was unstable, that they were moving too fast. And so he was sympathetic, had a sympathetic ear to anybody who had a complaint about how fast things were going or about the change in the organization, and it was creating tremendous waves inside the organization, and he had to change his mindset, which by the way is very difficult to be able to do, to be able to make it happen. So people want that stability. They want to make things go forward in a different way. They also want leaders with compassion. In other words, people want to be looked on as people. We get up, we have families. Sometimes our families are sick. Sometimes we have to do stuff. I want people who care about me, who actually literally care about me as a human being, that I'm not employee number 57. And so often we have a tendency not to look at people. For example, I can't believe that people might look at, if we think of it this way, we put machines on our balance sheets, right? If you're an accounting major, if you've looked at accounting, we put machines on our balance sheet and we take care of them because they're very valuable. I believe that what we should do is put human beings on our balance sheets and look at them as the most valuable asset that we really have, and we don't do that right now. I think when and if we can get to that point, it will make an incredible difference in the overall structure of things. Last thing that people want to do is they want to come to work and they want to be able to hope. Like, I hope I have a pathway forward. I hope that I'm making a difference. Hope has an incredible impact on people's brains. I heard yesterday a story. I'm going to tell you this real quick. It's not politically correct. I'm going to tell you two politically incorrect stories. They're not bad, but they're both having some animals in them. And this one was about testing rats in the 50s. And what they did with rats in the 50s, and they can't do it today because of the rules and regulations, is they had scientists and they had buckets of water, and they dropped rats in water and looked how long they would swim before they drowned, which is a terrible thing, I know. And we'd never do that today. And what they found was it took about 13 minutes till the rat would give up and drown. And what they did was they said, well, what happens if we take the rat out at about 10 minutes and give it a 15-minute break, then put it back in? And you know how long the rats went? 60 hours doing that. So if you think of how that hope, because the rats, they believed, hoped that they were going to be okay. They were given hope by taking them out. They went back in. And we can't cognitively say that for sure, but their analogy was there was hope aside. Just think about what hope can do for people in a workplace where it's a hopeful work environment, positive work environment, where people want to come every day. It's like connecting the dots to jets on the bottom of your feet in terms of looking forward. So I'm going to finish by telling you a story. And I'm going to connect the dots here because we have behaviors that we'd like to leave behind. Right? We all have these behaviors. I've been talking about behaviors of leadership that would impact stuff. So I want to tell you a story about a professor, since we're at a college, that was doing research on why we do what we do. And he and an assistant went out hiking through the countryside, interviewing various people in small towns and villages. They came to a very small village and went to a house on the outskirts of that village. The house was this ramshackle farmhouse. We've seen them in Pennsylvania. It had dirty windows, it had peeling paint, and a porch with broken railings. In the front yard or next to the barn, there was a pile of rusty farm debris, piles of debris laying around, just not good. They knocked on the front door, and the farmer opened the door. His clothing and his hair were messy and dirty, and he had not shaved in a while. He had that barnyard smell, and it was almost overpowering. The professor explained the purpose of their visit, and they were invited into the house. It was kind of worse inside than it was outside. There was a grandma and a grandpa, kind of an extended family, 2 kids and a mom, all sitting in a big room that was kind of filthy. And since it was getting late, the farmer asked them to stay for dinner and spend the night. After dinner, the farmer told them a story about their cow. It was what kept them alive. They took turns milking the cow. The family took turns milking the cow, and they made cheese and butter to sell in the village. Just enough to live on. They moved the cow around the farm every couple of hours to enjoy the best grass. Everyone in the family helped. After a while, the conversation died down and everyone went to sleep. Early the next morning, the professor woke up his assistant before everybody else, and they crept out of the house. The professor suggested that they go around back and look at the cow. Go around the back, take a look at the cow. And when the professor approached the cow, he reached into his pack, he grabbed a knife, and he cut the throat of the cow. His assistant freaked out, as you could imagine. And he did not know what to do. The professor said not to worry, and they were on their way. A year later, they were completing their research, and they arrived back at the same small village. The professor suggested that they go visit that same farm. When they arrived, they could hardly recognize the place. The windows were shiny and clean. A new coat of paint was on everything. Porch rails were fixed and in place. Even the yard was clear and the grass was trimmed. When they went to the door, the farmer answered, and to the assistant's surprise, he was happy to see them. He was clean cut, had khakis on, and a newly pressed shirt, and he told them this story. He said, "Professor, when you left, We woke up and went to move the cow. Someone had killed it. We didn't know what to do. How would we live? Then I remembered that we had a cabinet filled with seeds. It was filled with all sorts of vegetable seeds, and we had collected over the years. I also remembered that we'd been moving the cow around the fields, and we had some very fertile farmland here now. So if you check out back, you can find a very large truck garden, and we have opened a farmer's market in town to sell our produce. We're planning an orchard out back too. At first, we thought we were lost, and now due to the death of our cow, we have a new and better life. So I ask you, today, each one of you, what's that cow that you have to kill? Because they keep us from being our best selves. And sometimes you have to think about how you turn to be your best self, and you have to let something go that's a habit, as I've talked about with the neuroscience here, to make a difference. So think about that. Thank you very much. So you guys have questions? Are we going to ask questions now? Yeah. Anybody have any questions? I'm happy to answer them. None? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Is there what would you say is the most common cow that people need to get rid of?
Depends on, so he asked what's the most common cow that people have to get rid of? So depending on CEOs, there are a couple of things that I work with with CEOs that are tough for them to get rid of. One is that they have an extreme need to be right all the time. I need to be right. The other thing they have to work on, which happens a lot, is they have to be the smartest person in the room. So that many times when you're working with executives, they have to be the smartest person in the room. And what it does, an example would be I have a CEO of a company that I work with, and he felt that he was just offering up advice to everybody. They'd come in and say, here's what I'm going to do. And he goes, well, my experience was this and this. And pretty soon people stopped even offering him suggestions, and they found out they hated to go talk to him. And he was totally surprised and blindsided by this. And, so often you don't know what you don't know, right? That your behaviors are not always visible to you. And sometimes you think what's a good behavior is not. So those are two that I come across frequently that people should give up, is that need to be right all the time, and also the need to be the smartest person in the room. Yeah.
So when you talk about social nutrients and connectivity with people, I think your implication is that people should be maybe physically close together, but in let's say a work environment where there is like a sort of a diaspora of people all over the place.
Right.
What is your view on like social networks and how that fits into that framework?
Well, social networks, it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about Facebook, I mean, there's all sorts of research right now that's showing that Facebook is not particularly helpful for people, and it gives people a false illusion of real life. I do think that no matter how many people like to use their phones and be connected, there still is a gap where people need to be face to face. People, I don't care how many social networks you're on, people like to look each other in the eye, have a conversation, enjoy each other's company. And I think even in a work environment, if you can understand that people need to be able to have time to connect, we have people, especially if you're billing by the hour, like an engineering firm that has billable hours, they're going to kill people if they just sit around kind of chewing the fat a little bit. And people need to do that. I mean, they need to have time to be able to connect at a different level. I call it drive-by leadership. In other words, we have this relationship with people where we go to work with every day, and I walk in and I go, hey, John, how you doing? Good. Okay, glad to hear that. And that's the extent of the conversation, okay? And I think people need more than that to feel really connected in a work environment. I don't know, this is different, a social network. If I think of HYP, that's a different kind of network where people can get together and they do things. They play kickball, they have community events that they do all these great things. that are pretty fantastic, and I think that that's what's beneficial, is getting together and having a meaningful thing that you're going to do. I think you have to be intentional about it, though, in an organization, because it just doesn't, people are used to going work, I sit at my desk, I do my job. I have people right now, like I had a room full of people last week that I talked to, they're all in their 20s, and I said, where do you go for lunch? And they say, well, we bring our lunch to work and I sit at my desk and work because that's what I have to do. I said, oh my gosh. 8 hours at the job plus never taking a break. And as much as we'd like to believe it, we're not computers that sign on at 6 a.m. in the morning and sign off at 9 o'clock at night without any breaks. And I think that, if you look at, Tony Schwartz has written a bunch of books about the energy level that we can put into an environment. And without normal breaks, and we have a rhythm that is about every 90 minutes, most people, if we're not taking a 15 or 20 minute break every 90 minutes and getting up, walking around, moving, our bodies are not meant to sit. It's probably one of the reasons we have all these diseases that we have right now, is we're sitting a whole lot more than we're standing and moving around. So, and Tony talks about all of the energy that you gain from movement, all the normal things, eating well, sleeping well, hydration, all those kind of things are really important for executives. And I talk with people about that, because if you want to be your best every day, you cannot be sick. You can't be tired, and that doesn't mean they're not days that you have long days, but it also means that you have to kind of take the time to do it. The other thing that I see more and more today, and if you're not thinking about this, I'll call it mindfulness. Some people might call it meditation, but I think it's just centering yourself. We have so many things when we get tired, right? It's easy to get triggered when you get tired, and we need to take a few moments just to center and feel better and to get to be our best selves again. And that doesn't take very long, and it adds an incredible amount. You can do more work in less time if you choose to do that. And most people say, how am I ever going to take 20 minutes and sit there and close the door and meditate? But I think just going out for a slow walk is that. This isn't something that, and people don't want to do that because you feel like you're not working. We've grown up in this society where I got to work every minute of the day. Any other questions? Yeah.
So, as a CEO, what kind of things do you look for in management so that they're able to implement the stuff you talk about?
His question was, as a CEO, what do I look for in management? So when I'm running a company or when I'm talking to people, first of all, I like people who are curious about the human beings that work around them. I think it's terrible for people to look at that. If you're a manager, then you're kind of a command. Managers direct people to do things. Leaders have this vision that can inspire people to want to do more than they thought about. And so I look for those characteristics where people have a little bit of vision. I'd look for them to be positive for the most part. I don't think you can be every day. My energy level is different. Okay, the truth is I can bring it better some days than other days. If we think of all the great athletes in the world, they can do better sometimes. Managers or leaders are the same way. But I do think if everybody's intention, it's the intention behind. The other thing is that it's how you look at people. Next time we'll talk about purposeful leadership. And if you think about stuff like this, I would like people who view human beings differently. The past 40 years, we've paid CEOs millions of dollars to fire people, right? First time business goes down, you fire a bunch of people. What if we paid them to be more creative and find ways to keep those good people hired so that they could then continue on after there's the dip in the economy comes back? And yet we don't pay people to do that. We pay them to cut back. And I think it's a different psychology. And what I'd like to do is have people have a little different viewpoint toward the value of all those people around them and not think of it in such a cavalier way. I mean, when you look at Citibank's an example, Jamie Dimon fired 10,000 people. Am I proud of that? I'm not sure. I couldn't be, at all. But I fired a lot of people. So, I mean, but I wouldn't want to be that person today. So I look for a number of characteristics that I think would be a great leader. And if you think of the nurture nature kind of thing. I believe that people can learn to be better leaders if they work at it. There are all sorts of studies, and they did the twin study, and they found that I think only about 30% of what you have in you is the nurture part or the nature part of it. The rest of it is going to be, the nurturing and how you get to the next level. So people can learn to be better, that's for sure. We good? Yes?
Back to the two problems that you mentioned in terms of, you don't know what you don't know. Are there particular tools or techniques that you would recommend in terms of getting 360-degree feedback?
Yeah. So one thing you could ask, well, two questions you could ask somebody, and you could try this with the people next to you before you walk out the door if you're friends with them. But you could ask, what's one thing that you think that I do really well? And the other one is, if there were one behavior or one thing that you think I could improve upon, what would that be? And you have to be open to the feedback, and I would just say thank you for that. I would not try and defend myself. I would just say thank you, because if you want to get better, you have to be open to that perspective. And the truth is that not a lot of people really want the feedback. They'd kind of like to talk about getting the feedback, but if you really want the feedback, then you go ask 20 people, not just one, and you get a real cross-section of who does what, what they think about you. And I think your eyes would be opened if you ask people that question and we're able to it's kind of paying it forward. You can say thank you, and then you tell them what you might do. I'm going to do this then. Thanks for that feedback. So, okay?
Hey, well, let's thank John one more time.
Thank you. Okay.
I couldn't help